They called him untouchable for a reason. Decades of power, millions in cash, and a reputation so feared it made enemies vanish. Even behind bars, his name still meant something, until it didn't. The moment he found out his own brother had crossed a line no code could excuse, the game changed. This wasn't the kind of revenge that comes fast or loud. It was slow, calculated, relentless. From a prison cell, he pulled strings that would shatter dozens of lives and wipe out an entire empire. This is the story of what happens when betrayal turns a kingpin into something far more dangerous. In 2007, a man sat in a quiet diner and said Nicky Barnes was not around anymore. He was talking about himself, but in the third person, like that name belonged to somebody else. And in a way, it did. The flashy kingpin, the loud Harlem legend, the man addicted to attention and excess was gone. What was left was a balding older man with a limp in regular jeans, asking a waitress to wrap up his leftovers. The streets knew Nicky Barnes. The world in front of him now did not, but rewind the tape and the picture changes completely. Back in the tail end of the hippie era, while America was wrestling with Vietnam, heroin, and political chaos, Barnes wasn't just outside. He was running things. Harlem was home base, but his name didn't stay local. It moved through New York, through the drug trade, and eventually into headlines and history. Before the empire, before the money, before the disappearance, he was just a Harlem kid trying to survive a broken home. Leroy Nicholas Barnes was born October 15, 1933, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment near 8th Avenue and West 113th Street. He lived there with his parents and sister. His father worked as the building superintendent, but he had side hustles too, selling weed, selling beer, running poker games out the apartment. The problem was, he gambled just as hard as he hustled, so most of the money never stayed. By 6 years old, Nicky was already outside, not because he wanted adventure, but because the apartment stayed loud with arguments and tension. That's where he met Jackie Gomez, another neighborhood kid trying to figure life out. They became close, started running together, stealing purses, breaking into cars, doing little jobs that slowly turned into bigger ones. By 13, they were members of a street gang called the Tiny Turks. Things shifted when Nicky found heroin his father had hidden for a dealer in a utility closet. Curiosity turned into usage, and usage turned into addiction. He pulled Jackie into it with him. The street stopped being a playground and became a trap. One night, his parents' fighting exploded into something ugly. Nicky tried to stop it by firing a homemade zip gun at his father. The gun blew up in his hand, and the bullet barely even made contact. It didn't fix anything. It ended whatever family was left. He left home and stayed with the Tiny Turks. To support his habit, he started selling heroin and dropped out of school. 2 local dealers noticed him and pulled him in as a courier, running product between Harlem neighborhoods. That was his first real step into the business. Then Jackie was killed by police during a subway booth robbery. That loss snapped something inside Barnes. He walked away from robberies and decided if he was going to live in the streets, he was going to do it smarter. He committed fully to selling heroin. By 1959, he was making about $1,600 a day. Serious money for that time. The police eventually caught up with him. A tip led them to his place where they found heroin, needles, gear, and piles of cash. He was convicted and sent to Greenhaven prison for 3.5 years. That prison time changed his entire future. Inside Greenhaven, he converted to Islam and met Matthew Matty Madonna, an associate of the Lucchese crime family. Despite racial segregation inside the prison, they connected. Madonna was serving time for murder and saw something in Barnes. He taught him structure, discipline, and how organized crime actually worked. Barnes went in a street dealer and came out a businessman. When he was released in 1962, Barnes re-entered the game with new connections and new backing. He got half a kilo of heroin on consignment, a silenced Beretta, and $5,000 in startup money from Madonna's brother Frank at a restaurant in East Harlem. Barnes focused on quality. Even though he cut the product, he made sure it stayed stronger than anything else on the street. That reputation built loyalty and demand. Around that time, he met a woman known as Sister. She suggested something different, hiring women to cut heroin, but having them work naked so they couldn't steal product. It was crude, but it worked. The operation stayed tight. By the end of that year, Barnes and Sister were married in a small civil ceremony in the Bronx. In 1965, the law finally caught up to one of Nicky Barnes's processing spots, the places where the product got cut and packaged. Police raided the location and walked out with roughly $500,000 worth of heroin. Barnes was arrested on possession charges, and investigators immediately labeled him one of the biggest distributors moving weight through Harlem and the Bronx, saying he had around 50 people working for him. Barnes never accepted that version of the story. He later claimed the whole thing was a setup. The court didn't see it that way, and he was sentenced to 25 years. Prison didn't slow him down, it sharpened him. While locked up, Barnes converted to Islam and connected with Joseph Crazy Joe Gallo from the Colombo family. Gallo pitched a bold idea that they could team up and organize heroin distribution in Harlem, then slowly push the mafia out of New York's drug trade altogether. In 1969, the system blinked. An appeals court took another look at Barnes's case and found the tip that led to the raid came from an illegal wiretap. Even worse, recordings surfaced of an NYPD officer talking about framing him. That was enough to blow the whole case apart. The conviction was thrown out and Barnes walked free. Life was shifting fast. His marriage fell apart after his wife went through her own religious change. Around that same time, Madonna was out of prison too and started feeding Barnes heavy amounts of product again. By 1971, Barnes met Thelma Grant, a dancer who quickly became a serious part of his life. They had a daughter together named Nicole. Now Barnes wasn't just trying to make money, he was trying to build something untouchable. He started recruiting proven names: Frank Alphonse James, Wally Rice, Jazz Hayden, Ishmael Muhammad, Gaps Foreman, and Guy Fisher. Together they formed a 7-man leadership circle called the Council. This wasn't just business partners shaking hands. They swore loyalty, promised to treat each other like brothers, and agreed to stay away from each other's women. Each man controlled his own territory, but they moved as one. Their reach spread across Harlem and Brooklyn, and what really separated them was their product. It was stronger, cleaner, and cheaper than anything else on the street. Barnes started to believe he was beyond the law. That belief earned him the name Mr. Untouchable. Cases fell apart around him. Evidence vanished. Witnesses forgot what they saw or never showed up at all. Money and fear worked like armor. The profits climbed into the millions, and the violence climbed right alongside it. Police once found over $100,000 in his car, more cash in his apartment, and a small arsenal of weapons. Still, nothing ever seemed to stick. At his peak, Barnes was pulling in around $25 million a year. He bought mansions in the Bronx and New Jersey, stacked his garage with luxury cars, and filled closets with hundreds of suits, shoes, and leather coats. But he didn't just spend, he invested. Gas stations, travel agencies, automated car washes, even federally insured housing projects in other states. He built a legitimate-looking shell around an illegal empire. His name got so big that people whispered he inspired a hit song on the radio. By 1973, police were watching him around the clock, following him for months straight. After all that, the only thing they managed to charge him with was a weapons case, and even that got tossed. Barnes knew he was being watched and treated it like a game. He would drag his tail through dozens of stops just to exhaust them. Grocery stores, bars, clubs, all over Harlem, just to remind them he was always a step ahead. Behind the scenes, Barnes had become something new. Not just a hustler, not just a boss, but a strategist. He studied law, learned the system, and used it. Even the mafia started coming to him. A detective once pointed out how things had flipped. how Italians from Little Italy were now traveling uptown just to meet Barnes on his own turf. By the mid-70s, his legal world got strange. Someone tried to post his bail with checks from a Harlem church. The court rejected it. Then, Barnes tried using millions in real estate as collateral instead. Around that same time, he secretly started seeing a 19-year-old named Shamika while still involved with Grant. In 1975, the council made a major move, buying $250,000 worth of heroin from Mikey Puglisi of the Bonanno family. The product was trash, weak, unsellable. The council demanded their money back. Puglisi disappeared. When he resurfaced in 1976, he offered a refund and more product to smooth things over. Barnes wasn't interested. He believed Puglisi was a federal informant. He ordered him killed. On July 29, 1976, Barnes's men tracked Puglisi down in Manhattan and executed him in the street, shooting him repeatedly at point-blank range. Barnes prepared for retaliation from the Bonanno family. It never came, and that silence only made him feel more untouchable than ever. On October 15th, Barnes decided to celebrate his birthday like only he could. He took over the penthouse of the Time Life building in Midtown, turned it into a private club in the sky, and invited over 200 of the biggest names in black organized crime. Down on the street, police sat in unmarked cars just staring. All they could really do was watch a parade of Cadillacs and Rolls Royces glide up to the building while well-dressed guests disappeared into the elevator. Inside, the place felt like royalty. Family flew in from all over the country. Power was in the air, and in a room full of black hustlers, bosses, and shot callers, there was only one white face in the whole place: Barnes's lawyer. The DEA had only existed for a few years at that point, but they were already locked in on Barnes. They even slipped undercover agents into the party, posing as waiters and valets. While Barnes was toasting to another year alive, the people pouring his drinks were quietly building the case that would end it all. By November, the council's operation was pulling in close to $100 million in heroin sales. That number scared the government. The chase turned into a hunt. That's when an undercover agent named Lou Diaz got his opening. Through an informant named Robert G., Diaz was introduced to Wally Fisher, Guy Fisher's younger brother. Diaz played the role of a West Coast dealer trying to get back in the game. Calm, patient, believable. At the same time, another agent, Mary Buckley, worked her way in from the social side. She got brought into Julia's Bar, a Harlem hotspot tied closely to Barnes's crew, walking in alongside a respected street figure known as Promise Bruce. Barnes's world was getting surrounded from every angle, and nobody on the inside could feel it yet. By December, Diaz had convinced Wally to sell him half a kilo of heroin, a deal worth around $200,000. Barnes himself approved it and told Wally where to pick up the supply from a man known as Fat Stevie. On December 29th, Diaz and the informant drove to a garage in Harlem to make the pickup. Across the street, the DEA had the whole scene wired and watched everything. They even caught Barnes on location talking business. That one moment tied him directly to the drugs, and it mattered more than he realized. By March 1977, the walls were closing in. It started with a small handoff at Julia's Bar. Buckley passed $12,000 to one of Barnes' people for heroin. It wasn't a big deal on the street, it was a huge deal in court. On March 15th, the warrants dropped. Barnes, Fisher, Hayden, and others were targeted. Barnes tried to run, leading police on a chase through Manhattan before getting boxed in and arrested. 19 others went down too, along with hundreds of thousands in cash and a mountain of drugs. After making bail, Barnes didn't hide. He leaned into the spotlight. He sat down with a major magazine and posed for a story that crowned him as Untouchable. He stared into the camera wearing designer shades and a patriotic tie, daring the system to stop him. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was ego. The article lit a fire all the way to the White House. The president took it personally and told the Justice Department to hit Barnes as hard as the law would allow. Prosecutors tried everything. Taxes didn't work because Barnes paid them. Community pressure didn't work because Harlem loved him. He gave back, fed people, showed up to church, and made himself look like a hero. But the reality stayed the same. He was still sitting on top of a heroin empire. On September 29, 1977, Barnes and 14 of his people went on trial. It ran for 9 long weeks. Barnes didn't even pretend he was innocent. His argument was simple. He said the government couldn't catch him doing anything wrong without setting him up. He said they twisted words, bent recordings, and built the story instead of catching a crime. The prosecution answered with tapes, testimony, and detail, recordings of his associates talking deals, evidence of structure, proof of coordination. The case was so serious, the court did something that had never been done before. They used an anonymous jury, hiding the identities of the people deciding Barnes's fate just to keep them safe. For the first time in his life, Nicky Barnes wasn't the one controlling the room, and the game he had been running for decades was finally being played against him. He came back from lunch looking low, not stressed about prison, not worried about the case, but sad over a woman who had just told him she needed space. He said if she was going to start putting up boundaries, then it was over. What bothered him most wasn't losing her company, it was losing her scent. He joked that he would have to fly to the Far East just to find a smell like hers again. He even said he would wear black the next day in mourning, then laughed and added something wild about hoping she would wear black too and bring a whip. The energy was strange, electric, like he was more alive in that moment than he had been the entire trial, and he didn't come back in black. Instead, he showed up transformed. All trial he had played it safe in dull blues and quiet suits. Now he walked in wearing a rust-colored shirt stretched over his solid frame, a copper tie, and a sharp gray and purple houndstooth jacket. His pants were perfectly tailored, held up by a lizard skin belt with tan ankle boots that looked like they cost more than most people's rent. Even his glasses were a statement, tinted lilac with purple frames and tiny metal Playboy logos on the arms. Barnes wasn't mourning, he was performing. Meanwhile, the defense team was feeling good. The jury's early notes made it seem like they had already tossed out the 2 biggest charges, the conspiracy count and the criminal enterprise count that painted Barnes as the CEO of a heroin corporation. Instead, the jurors were focusing on the smaller specific charges tied to individual acts. There was something else unusual too. The judge had ordered the jury to stay anonymous. No names, no addresses, just numbers. They weren't even fully sequestered, which meant the jury ended up being more urban than usual, including 5 black jurors. The defense felt that worked in their favor, but there was one juror they didn't like at all, juror number 7. He was a blonde lone officer from Westchester with a stiff posture and a permanent scowl. The defense nicknamed him the Nazi. One afternoon, he even flipped off one of the defense lawyers through the bus window as the jury was being driven away. The judge brushed it off like it meant nothing. The lawyers studied every juror like weather patterns. Number 7 always looked red and angry. His close ally, number 8, looked pale and exhausted. The black jurors, though, looked calm and steady. That gave the defense hope. Barnes's main lawyer became convinced one of the white women on the jury was friendly toward them because she smiled whenever she passed. His partner teased him that she smiled at everyone. That night, the lawyers talked odds. The government had almost never lost a case like this, but when they did lose, it was usually because something had been paid for behind the scenes. Nobody thought that was happening here. The next morning, Barnes arrived an hour late. The prosecutors immediately threatened to send him straight to jail for it. Barnes exploded. He shouted that he had more reason than anyone to be there, that he had hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in this case, and nobody was going to stop him from showing up for his own trial. Then the notes from the jury started coming in. Every request asked to rehear the government's witnesses. None asked for the defense cross-examinations, the part where the defense felt strongest. That shook the room. The lawyers began whispering that juror number 1, a sharp policy-type woman, was steering the ship, and she wasn't steering it their way. Late in the day, the worst note arrived. The jury asked to hear the judge's instructions on the second count again. That meant the first count was already decided. That meant they had agreed a conspiracy existed. Now they were just deciding who ran it. By 6 o'clock, when another note came in, the defense was convinced the verdict was about to land. The room filled with federal prosecutors wearing confident smiles like sharks smelling blood. But it wasn't a verdict. The jury wanted to see the tape. They wanted the video of Stevie Baker unloading huge bags of cutting agent from his trunk and carrying them into his apartment. 3 televisions were rolled into the courtroom. Everyone leaned forward. The footage was clear, but every time the forewoman paused it, the screen froze into static and blurred the man's face. Every pause wiped his identity away. When the jury left the room, the defense erupted with relief. They kept repeating that the man on the tape couldn't be identified. They knew it was Stevie Baker. Stevie Baker knew it was him too. He had already admitted it. The final morning of the trial, Barnes walked into court looking finished. Eyes red, clothes wrinkled, energy gone. He sat alone in an empty jury box like he hadn't slept at all. Someone asked if he got any rest. He shook his head and said agents followed him all night like a whole motorcade. And he wasn't lying. Diaz and Nieves had been glued to him since the year before and didn't plan on letting him slip away now. Barnes didn't want them knowing where he lived, so he tried to get slick. He went to a hotel where he usually slipped the clerk a few dollars to hang around without checking in. The garage was closed, so he parked his Mercedes outside and figured the agents tailing him would double as security. While the agents were inside checking records, the clerk pretended he had never heard of Barnes. Then the NYPD rolled up and towed his car. By the time Barnes found out, he had just enough cash to get it out until they hit him with all his unpaid parking tickets and tripled the price. So the man the government was trying to lock up for life ended up catching a ride to court from the same agents trying to bury him. That morning, the jury sent out a note that gave the defense a flicker of hope. They wanted to hear one piece of evidence again, a recording from a bug planted inside a Harlem garage the government called Barnes's headquarters. The whole case turned on one word. The prosecution said the tape captured someone saying they had to pick up a kilo from Barnes's car. The defense said the word wasn't kilo at all. It was payroll. They played the tape. When that moment hit, it was clear. The word was payroll, not even close. The defendants leaned back and pulled off their headphones like they had just been vindicated by the universe itself. The jurors kept listening. They asked to hear it again. Then they looked at each other. The defense team felt the momentum shift and started believing the storm had passed. The prosecutors looked rattled. Around 3 in the afternoon, the clerk announced the jury was ready. The room froze. Cards stopped mid-game. Conversations died. One of the defendants told them to deal another hand anyway. Then the forewoman stood up. She said guilty. She kept saying it, one count after another. The gallery started crying. The defense table stayed still. Barnes didn't move. He just sat there straight-backed, face blank, eyes on the jury. After the judge dismissed the panel, a young lawyer walked over and shook Barnes' hand, telling him he always thought he was solid. Barnes nodded and said he never believed they would really get him. But they did. January 19th, 1978 was the day the door slammed shut. Judge Henry F. Worker handed Nicky Barnes a life sentence. And just like that, the most feared man in Harlem was shipped off to federal prison in Marion, Illinois. Ironically, while the streets kept spinning without him, Barnes sat behind bars earning a college degree, sharpening his mind while his empire slowly rotted. Outside, the council was barely holding together. Guy Fisher had beaten his case and stepped up to run things, but the circle was shrinking. Just Fisher, Muhammad, Foreman, James, and Rice left standing. Power never sits still, though. Barnes eventually heard whispers that cut deeper than any sentence. Fisher was sleeping with his mistress, Shameka. From inside a cell, rage traveled fast. Barnes ordered a hit on the new boss, but the streets didn't listen anymore. That right there told him everything he needed to know. His word no longer carried weight. Then came the real betrayal. Barnes found out his own partners were skimming money off deals he was still coordinating from prison. Worse than that, they were getting high right in front of his two young daughters. That was the line. The empire he built brick by brick, rule by rule, was being trashed by the same people who swore loyalty. Barnes had always lived by a strict code, the unwritten rules of the game. But once that code was broken, he broke it too. That's when Barnes did the unthinkable. He reached out to law enforcement. His reason wasn't noble or emotional. It was cold and simple. He couldn't touch them from inside, and he wanted payback. If he was stuck doing life, then everyone who crossed him was coming along for the ride. Revenge became his new hustle. For the next 15 months, Barnes lived a double life. Locked in a cell, he went fully undercover, quietly dismantling the very organization he once ruled. This wasn't half-hearted cooperation. Barnes handed the feds the entire blueprint: names, routes, methods, secrets. Once he started talking, he never stopped. He exposed everything: robberies tied to extremists, prison escapes, and even chilling plots aimed at public officials, including the president. He testified before congressional and presidential commissions, explaining exactly how inmates were still running drug empires through jailhouse phones. His information didn't just close cases, it saved lives. But the streets always collect interest. On December 13th, 1982, the violence came home when Shameka was gunned down in a Washington Heights bar by a masked shooter. By then, though, the clock had already run out on the council. On March 10th, 1983, the final arrest warrants dropped, sealing the empire's fate. Word spread fast through the federal system. At USP Lewisburg, a maximum security fortress, investigators uncovered the bombshell nobody thought possible. Nicky Barnes had flipped. The untouchable Kingpin was now a government cooperator. When Barnes finally took the stand, the myth disappeared. He didn't posture, he didn't flex, he broke down. Tears replaced bravado as he sold out the men who once stood beside him. And the more he talked, the uglier the truth became. Asked how much heroin his organization moved, Barnes answered without hesitation: thousands of pounds. The courtroom froze. Even the judge looked shaken. Hours of testimony revealed a multi-million-dollar machine fueled by hired killers who treated murder like routine work. The casual way they spoke about brutality stunned everyone listening. Barnes named names and gave details that made people squirm. He pointed to Frank James as the man who ordered a hit on his own brother-in-law using an ice pick. He described a four-man hit squad where one recruit murdered a random person on the street just to prove he was worthy of the job. When Barnes was finished, there was nothing left. Fisher, Muhammad, Rice, Foreman, and James were all convicted of running a continuing criminal enterprise and sentenced to life without parole. Even Thelma Grant went down, catching 10 years after a guilty plea. The council was erased. Barnes spent years bouncing between courtrooms, testifying again and again. His cooperation helped convict over 50 drug dealers and murderers, cementing his reputation as the most effective turncoat in American criminal history. Once his role became public, general population was no longer an option. He was moved to the Witness Protection Unit at Otisville Prison. The danger didn't stop there. $1 million hit was placed on his daughters, forcing the government to pull them out of their lives and give them entirely new identities. Behind bars, Barnes leaned fully into reinvention. He graduated from college, won a national poetry contest, and committed himself to becoming someone else entirely. Law enforcement praised him publicly, but judges kept denying his release. Eventually, the weight of his cooperation became impossible to ignore. A court ruled there was a strong public interest in rewarding what he had done, and his sentence was reduced. In 1998, after 21 years locked up, Nicky Barnes walked free under a new name. He vanished into Middle America, into the quiet anonymity he said he always wanted. No spotlight, no fear, just work, routine, and respect. The former Kingpin ended up running automatic car washes. The most questionable thing he sold wasn't drugs or violence. It was a cheap flake burger made from leftover beef scraps. The man who once ruled Harlem now lived for regular mornings and honest paychecks. Barnes died of cancer in 2012, but the secrecy of witness protection kept his death hidden until 2019. By then, he was just an aging grandfather with a limp far removed from the legend. As he once put it, Nicky Barnes no longer existed. One of his daughters later explained why the family stayed silent. The past was heavy, and privacy was the only piece they had left. Still, the story may not be finished. She and her sister have considered telling it themselves, what it was really like growing up as the daughters of a man who ruled an empire, destroyed it, and then disappeared from history.